Hello, this is Will Faerber from Art to Ride, and today we're looking at the first submission by Megan of her horse Emma. Megan has had Emma for 22 years, so whatever we see here is the result of whatever she's been doing for all that time. So what we see here is the typical horse that after so many years of riding, the back just starts to collapse, and we can see how we have the hunter's bump, as they used to call it, which is really just the beginning of kissing spine, because the back is beginning to collapse in on itself. But happily, Megan has figured out that she needs to find some other way to go, and this is the way she's going, and that's a great thing. So this horse has a ways to go and will be an interesting one to watch as it develops, because you're going to so clearly see everything that can go wrong by watching this. Now, you're not quite ever getting the horse really to the place that it needs to get to yet, but on the other hand, you're working in the right direction, so that's the step in the right direction. So what I would do with this horse is let it walk for a lot longer. Take a look at our videos on work in hand. And I would try to get the horse leg yielding in hand and softening to a bridle. Now I see that you're working in a halter here, which I really don't recommend. What you have to remember is this idea of these halters with knots on them is that basically, you know, if the horse does something, you can jerk on the halter, just like a bozal or whatever. They work on the soft tissue of the nose. So if this horse weren't going around here quietly, you would have to be quite severe on its face. Like, in other words, if it decided to take off with you or some such thing as like that, you would have to yank so hard on that to be able to, in order to control the horse, that you could easily do just as much damage as you could do lunging the horse in a bit, which would allow you more control, or at least in a real cavesson. So just kind of get that into your mind. And everybody that we're running across so many people, and I salute you, who want to do bridleless riding and this sort of thing. But you know, the problem with a lot of those people think that the whole idea of the bitless bridle is so that it's not so severe. They have an idea that any bit is a severe and punishable thing. But the reality is, as I have seen many times, horses ridden in bozals, it used to be very common that the jumper riders was, you know, by the time they would get the horse's mouth so dead that it wouldn't respond to any kind of bit, then they start jumping in bitless bridles, which are mechanical hackmores and all these kind of things. But they all do the exact same thing, which is to put pressure on those the soft cartilage of the lower part of the horse's face, which can be quite painful, and I've seen people do real damage to horses' faces by virtue of doing that, literally crush those bones. So just because a bridle has no bit in it does not mean that it's not capable of creating problems for you. But this horse is going around quietly enough in this that he's not yanking you around the arena. But we do want to encourage the horse to stretch into the contact. And some horses like this one, who has been upside down for obviously many, many, many years to develop into the state that he's in. So it would be probably more beneficial to you getting the horse to stretch if you would put the horse in a regular just snapple bit, as we use on all horses, just a French link loose ring snapple is what we use on all horses, and begin to get a little correct contact. Remember, the problem with bits is that people take too much contact with them, and the way we work, we just simply don't do that. If we're going to use side reins, for instance, to help the horse encourage the stretch, those are always so loose that there's no backwards pressure on anything. The same thing with the shambone. If we adjust it correctly, the horse can still, it just can't quite get its head to the extreme position that it could. Like a horse like this is often helped. I've helped a lot of Arabs. They're usually Arabs and horses that have been broken over the third vertebra are usually the horses that we use the shambone on most of the time. So we can see this horse is basically trotting along here, basically with the brakes on. He's just sort of pulling himself along by his shoulders. There's no real engagement through his back. His back is just kind of, you know, you can see that there's almost no flexion in the hock, and you can see how the legs are dropping out behind. And even the legs themselves, you could say at times this horse looks a little off, but he's so out of rhythm. And remember, when we say rhythm, we're talking about the rhythm between the two ends of the horse. As in right now, the horse is going at a fairly consistent speed, but you can see how its hindquarters are just dropping out behind it as he even got slower there. So you want to do a lot more work in the walk and try to get this horse swinging. Once again, I would put this horse into a snaffle bridle. I'd start working with some side reins, just long ones. I'd start with the side reins and see how the horse responds to those before I would then go to the shambone. But watch our videos on those two things. And get the horse at least accustomed to the bridle. Now, if it's just the fact, when you put a bit on the horse, he does nothing but try to spit it out and his tongue opens and all this kind of stuff, then you'd want to work with a cavesson and put the cavesson over the top of, so the horse just carries the bit in its mouth, because the horse must, learn to just accept the bit in the mouth. And that's where so many people go wrong, is they don't take the time to get the horse, accepting the bit, and then they're starting to pull on it. So the best way to train a horse is simply to wait until they have accepted the bridle and keep their mouth closed. In other words, accepted the idea, like a child getting a pair of braces in his mouth. Think of this: if a horse has never had anything in his mouth, it takes him a little bit to just get accustomed to the idea that something is going to be there. So we never want to touch that bit until that horse has become comfortable. And I highly recommend that when you do, you give them a piece of sugar every time that you put the bit on, and even a couple during the workout. It helps to sweeten the deal, as we say, and the horse will be much more accepting of the bridle the next time. So all that's happening here, as we've seen so far, is just this horse is going much too slowly. Here you see like this. And that's what you don't want to do. You'd be better off letting the horse actually walk as slow as it wants to go. Like, that's a better walk than that was to trot. This walk at least has some value. The trot that he's getting here has no value at all, and he's just completely disconnecting between his front and back end. So he needs to do a lot more walk work, and that's how we rehab horses. Don't think that you can't build muscle. I said I started my career training and maintaining fox hunting horses for a family in Unionville, Pennsylvania. And, we brought them in at the end of the summer, and it took about 3 months to have them to the point where they would be really ready to hunt again. In the first part of that month would just be going out hacking them in a long frame, as I was always taught to have their noses on the ground when you hacked out so they could see where they were going. People did that, there wouldn't be so many accidents out there as we see today. So this is what we need to do, is get back to the walk work here. Or, you can try asking for a little more swing here by making the horse a little more active. But if you find that all it does is run and braces its neck even higher up in the air, then that's not going to be useful either, because the horse is resisting. Everything we're seeing here, the horse looks like uncomfortable. It's holding its tail in a strangely high, which makes me feel like he is trying to relieve himself. So, and when you see that as well, you want to come back to the walk. You never want to force horses to go to the bathroom. Like, if they look like they want to go, if they need to stop, let them stop. Some horses naturally can keep moving, others do not. But it's really a mistake to beat horses up when they're trying to relieve themselves, because as soon as they do, that tells me right away that the horse's back is starting to free up a little bit, which makes them want to go. In other words, things are starting to work right. That means their abdominal wall is beginning to pull up, which activates that desire to go to the bathroom, and that's what we want them to do. Once again, the biggest thing, all this talk about colic. Colic is mostly caused by stressed out, hollow-backed horses who have no support in their abdominal wall for their guts. And I think the scientific research and just the numbers would prove that out. If you ask any veterinarian where he sees the most colics, he'll tell you saddlebred barns to start with. So we want to get this horse much more swinging, and we'd want to bring him just back to the walk, and I would just let him walk again till either I'd give him some time here to relieve himself, because he's just got that look. And this is a perfect example, as you can see when you hear me talk about, if the horse isn't round, the thrust of the hind legs can't go up into the back and complete the stride. And you can see that clearly with this horse, because if you watch with each stride, his hips go higher. So he doesn't actually go anymore, he isn't lifted up anymore and sent forward. You can just see how that energy just wastes itself by pushing the hips up in the air like a jack every step the horse takes. Now watch here as he comes around. You see what I'm talking about? The hips push up and down, but the forehand just trips along. It's the forehand that's actually doing all the work here. This horse is just pulling itself. You see how it kind of stabs the front legs, and once again you see how far the back ends are out behind it. So once again, you've gone on here way too far with the horse doing way too much in the wrong manner. So what you have to put in your mind is you want to take as few steps as possible, especially if the horse is as old as this one, who's going to have some arthritis and these kinds of things. And I can tell you, these horses can come back from all these things, or many of the things that veterinarians, because they've never seen this kind of work, and it's too bad, because this is the kind of education in what training is that veterinarians ought to get. And I can tell you from my past that the good ones used to know this, and the good ones now, like Dr. Robson in Napa, understands this as a student of this as well. So they have a real physical understanding. It's like Who wants to go to a doctor that's never read anything but, okay, well, you take this pill for this and this, and unfortunately medicine has become that way as well. They just get out the book. I know you have these symptoms here, take this pill. But so many of these problems can be solved by correct training with horses, because you have to understand that it affects so much more than just the physicalness. It affects their mental attitude. They start to enjoy life. When they start to enjoy life, they stop colicking. They stop wanting to kill you. They stop wanting to throw you off and this sort of thing. So, it's your pocketbook and your health, both have reasons to want to do this correctly. So going back to the very beginning here, what we want to see have happen is just to come back and just work on the walk. I want you to get some side reins and put a simple snaffle bridle in the horse's mouth and just get the horse stretching a little more actively and getting the horse at least accompanying. Once again, if the horse doesn't, if it opens its mouth a lot when you put the bit in its mouth and doesn't seem comfortable, and of course always give them a piece of sugar, then you're just going to let the horse carry that bit until it does seem comfortable in his mouth. But I think you'd find, and if you're doing this because your horse has a hard mouth, know that all hard mouths are caused by the same thing, hollow back. As soon as you get the horse to stretch into the contact and you release that back, all of a sudden the jaw will totally relax and your horse will go from having a mouth like a ton of bricks to having a mouth that just feels like nice and soft and pliable, and you can actually feel the horse through it rather than just feel something hard and tense against you. So once again, I wouldn't canter this horse at this point. He's just, as you see, he just kind of canters upside down, throws his head up in the air, and kind of pulls himself along. And he actually looks quite unhappy doing it, as he does here. Now, this is a horse that I suspect he looks uneven when you see him going around here, but I think he's probably more bridle lame than anything else because he's so disconnected from his front to his back. So you have to come back to just the very, very beginning. And if that even means walking the horse in hand, that's what you have to do. I highly recommend, once again, you watch our work in hand videos and see if you can get a little bit of that going. But I think you would be better off just spending more time, even if you're not going to do any of that, and you leave it and keep going the way you're going here. Just let the horse stay in a walk. It's always a mistake to force horses to move. If you really have to beat a horse to get him to move, there's something seriously wrong with what's gone on in the training or the physical problems the horse may be having, because the nature of a healthy horse is to move forward. So that should be your first sign that it's not a healthy horse when they don't want to move. Especially with the well-bred horses. We see them all the time today. They just shut down at one point and say, I'm not going to do it anymore. Horses that have been roll-curred and all of this nonsense that we see going on in dressage today. Now we must get back to this idea of progressive training. And that can mean just if you do what you can do well and you stick to that, you don't keep trying to jump forward. And of course, that's the biggest problem in training today. If it's in jumper riders, first they're jumping a crossbar, and 2 weeks later they're jumping 4 foot. It just doesn't make any sense. I'm talking about for the horse. And of course, nor for the rider, but horses today jump so well, they jump so naturally, it's so bred into them now compared to what it once was when I was a child, when all the horses we had were either quarter horses or thoroughbreds, and most of the jumping horses that we had were thoroughbreds as they came back from the track, which is what used to be the second life for these horses, and was for many, many years up until the last 20 years. But the sad thing is that, the quality of these warm bloods is really what's allowed what has happened to happen. That is, they can get by on the horse's natural talent until they don't. And that's usually a very short period of time. So here with the walk, we have that same, you can see how sunken the horse's back is behind the saddle there. So you've got a long way to go here, but know that it's all possible. And at 22, the horse is not old in my way of thinking. We have lots of horses that old going beautifully. So just like with a person, you have to just think to yourself, this horse is completely out of shape. So if you were taking a bedridden person and you were going to try to get them fit, how long would it take? Obviously, it's going to take longer than that's going to take with someone who comes into the game physically fit or young and ready to build on. So, so much of this work, unfortunately today, because this is such an epidemic around the world of horses having been ridden hollow for the last 20 years, that what you have here is what we're seeing all over the world. And sadly, happily for this horse, it has you, someone who's decided to take a look around, and happily many people are these days. We're finally seeing a swing back to some kind of sensibility, at least in some of the people, though that has not shown itself yet to be in the FEI or the United States equestrian teams. It seems to just go, none of this seems to be reaching any of their ears from what we just saw at the last Olympic Games. You see someone like Marcus Enning ride and have such a beautiful ride, and then you see so many of these other people. It's like they're doing two different sports, which they really are. So looking at this trot now, same thing is happening here. This horse is just trotting. Too much of your trot time is just spent. He's just too hollow. He's just really not ready to do what you're doing. You can see there's this, he's protesting with his swishing of the tail. He still looks like, he looks quite uncomfortable. So what I would have to say to you about this is I don't even think you should be riding this horse at the moment. I would go back to just working it in hand. My view is I never ride a horse. If I can't stretch him in the walk within a few minutes of what I'm doing, I'm going to get off and go back to the groundwork. And if you stick to that simple principle, it'll also save your life. Because when you're riding around a horse, as you are doing here with this one, even though I'm sure you've come to trust this horse because of your years together and all this kind of thing, but when horses become as out of balance as this horse is now trotting around, you never know when you're just going to make a little turn and it's going to cross over its legs and flip over on top of you. I have seen it done at the walk, so this is something we always have to watch out for and remember all the time. You are literally, this is like driving a car with some of the wheels with the lug nuts loose and the brakes about to go out. In this one's case, it's not moving very fast, but that's the only reason why you're not having more difficulty. I mean, imagine taking this horse out and trying to gallop across the field. You might make it, but you have a very good chance that you would not. So you never want to ride horses out of balance, and that's the number one thing. I've seen so many accidents in my life at my age. I've seen every kind of horse accident you can imagine. And I've just seen way, way too many people go to the hospital for the same reason. They're riding horses out of balance, and they get away with it for years. It may not happen to them, but I guarantee you, if you keep at it, eventually one horse will cross over its legs, or you go over a fence, you'll get it in too tight, and it'll hit its chest, and over it will come on top of you. So you just have to remember this, and it starts here. So as far as I'm concerned, this horse is too out of balance to ride safely, even in the little indoor arena that you have it in here, if you want to really think of it that way. So my rule of thumb is I would not ride a horse in the trot that I couldn't stretch in the walk. And if I can't stretch it in the walk pretty quickly in the walk and get it over its back, I'm simply going to go back to the groundwork until I can get that. And that's what you should be doing. You just have to figure, people say sometimes, well, this method seems like it's going to take an awful long time. Well, there is no other method, I'll tell you now, that you can solve this horse's problems with. And this system, the classical system, is not mine, but understand that this is how you can get there, but it's going to take patience. So, it takes 2 years to put a foundation top line on a horse to begin to think about doing collection. So you can figure with a horse like this, as I said, this is like a person who's been bedridden for 5 years, and you've got to get them out and get them exercising. It's going to take some extra time. But if you take that extra time and don't do anything but walk until you can get the walk right on the horse, and then go on, the horse won't be worn out by the time you get this happening. And it's the only way that it ever will solve this horse's problem, that you'll ever solve this horse's problem in terms of the back. And this will just turn into worse kissing spine. And, this is what, once again, the fate of so many horses in the world today. I mean, that amazes me now when I go to horse shows and think, when I was a kid, if somebody came in with a horse with a back looking like, your horse looks, sadly, you would have thought that was a horse that was headed to the killer truck, and sadly it was, but because you didn't see. But now it's become normal. You walk around a horse show grounds, and this is how all the horses look. It's like people have forgotten what a horse well developed even looks like. Which is one thing that's so important, and I'm so happy that everyone's doing our historical picture Facebook site that we're doing there. We're collecting historical pictures of horses that are moving correctly over their backs and those that are not. And we've seen videos and rather photographs of ones that are racing, as well as dressage horses and all kinds of other things. So that's what we want to see. Understand that a horse is a horse, as Mr. Ed said, and they all, in order to perform safely and stay sound, have to be developed in exactly the same way. And there really is no other way to do it and have the end result be that the horse is lifting in its back and lowering its hindquarters and is completely relaxed at the same time. So this walk is certainly better than what we saw in the trot work, but you can just see how hesitant this is. The horse would get much more out of this if you would just walk it alongside it, for instance, and this is what I highly suggest you do. I want you to look at our videos on work in hand, but even if you can't get the work in hand going, what you can do is at least just get a dressage whip, which you hold in your outside hand. That would be your left hand as you lead the horse along your shoulder. So you can just reach back and tap the horse, with that dressage whip. And you can use a lunging whip as well, as long as you wrap up the long strain. If that's easier for you, if your arms aren't long, as mine are. And just walk along with the horse and get the horse to walk out. I mean, if you can't get the horse to walk out, without you on it, how can you expect to do it with you on it? So go back to that walk work, really get the horse stretching, develop it in that. Don't even think about riding the horse again until you get the horse stretching into the contact. And I would wait until you get the stretch in the trot before you think about riding again. So once you get that stretch in the trot, and that stays consistent around the circle. In other words, once you get the horse to relax in the session of the contact, it'll just stay there, relatively indefinitely until you change and gets in the zone. You see how this horse is just constantly irritating. It's constantly got its tail up in the air. It pins its ears back at times and, looks very angry about something. But, what it's mostly angry about is the poor thing is, had a life of, even, and I don't want to hurt your feelings with this. People do this. I mean, you at least have been smart enough to realize the error of your ways and trying to find an answer for this horse that you love so much, and that's commendable, because so many people would have just, oh, let's just buy the next one and the next one. And this is the attitude that, that is so appalling today in the horse world, is how expendable these beautiful creatures have become to the next generation. I mean, so many young riders today, at least the ones who are doing the show circuits and this kind of stuff, they just seem to, so many of them have this attitude that, it's all about them, and, if the horse does something wrong, it's all about the horse being bad and this kind of thing. Whatever the horse does is a reflection of the rider. So we must always think that. That's where we should be thinking if you are a real horseman. But, a real horseman doesn't take his horse knowing it's sore in another class just because they want to win that one more ribbon, knowing that the leg is about to go out. There's always another day, but once those legs are gone, you have nothing. Now, this does get a little bit better here. This is the first time we've seen him at least begin to come a little bit forward. That is by stretching its neck forward. Remember, when I say forward, I'm talking about engaging forward under the body. So you do get a little more swing. Now, this is the first time throughout all this that we've seen something that's beginning to look at least like it's swinging a little bit. So I think that potential is in there, and if you will just take the time to go back to the beginning here a little bit and get your groundwork going well. But you can see how he's kind of constantly swishing his tail, still holding that tail in that funny way, which makes me think he's... I know a lot of Arabs kind of have that thing, but it can also mean that they're internally a little uncomfortable. So that's something we want to watch. I'd want to see how that improves as time goes on here, as you get the horse to stretch. But right now, even though you did get a little bit more action here, though, the more you have him going, the more he's swishing his tail, which tells me he's not happy about all of that somewhere. So let's go back to the beginning, get the beginning straightened out. Usually doesn't take too long. And once again, I wouldn't go back to riding this horse until you have the stretch in the walk and the trot on the lunge line. Then go back to the walk work and do lots of walk work. Don't even think about trotting until the horse gets in the stretch and you feel that nice soft contact in the walk. Then, and only then, is the horse ready to trot and not just wear itself out. So, this horse is 22 now. If you do all this right, you can save this horse. But that's why you don't want to waste your time doing like you've done here today with a lot of trot work. That's really just taking more tread off the tires, but isn't doing anything in terms of for the horse, in terms of how it's going to benefit from it. And that's really how we think about them all. It's just sad that people have begun to think this show mentality that a horse is something that, like a race car. I have this one for a year, and then I buy the next model next year, and the next model next year. And Once again, sadly, those people never really get what they could get from riding a horse that actually is willing to do the work. As Bill Steinkraus said, one of my favorite quotes is, "It'll never be very good if you can't get the horse to like it." So bear that in mind in all we do. So if your horse is going along, swishing its tail and pinning its ears back and grinding its teeth and all these other things that are the sort of, they're not silent, but the horse is trying to communicate in the way he can his discomfort and displeasure with what is going on. So a horse that's happy in the work, they don't swish their tails, they don't grind their teeth, they don't pin their ears back. You don't see the whites of their eyes. They look relaxed and happy to do the work. It's quite easy to see once we begin to see horses that way again. This is Will Faerber from Art to Ride. I look forward to seeing your next video. A good job and a good start. I hope you take my advice, and I look forward to seeing the next one.